This is A Lost Plot, the podcast where we explore meaning in movies together. Hello, universe. Welcome back. It is your boy back with another episode of A Lost Plot. As always, I am your host, Maverick, and here we have back again one of our favorites, Patrick Avanto. Patrick, thank you for bringing it back around.
I'm always glad to be here, and especially for this particular episode, I'm really happy for this episode.
We've always thought we should spend a little time in the horror genre, and now here we are, taking our first little baby steps in there. But before we get to that, as always, we want to thank the viewers. So today we are thanking one of you who left a review on the Apple Podcast review app. You said, great concept. I like this way of learning about movie options. Great way to find new movies to watch. And this was from Boy Mama 9. Don't know who you are again, but we do appreciate you sending us the love. Yeah, exactly. If any of you listening have not yet left us a review, please do it. It makes a big difference for a small podcast like ours. And that's all. With that, let's get into the real meat of the issue today. That being, what is The Thing about? It's a 1982 horror movie. It was was by Bill Lancaster and directed by John Carpenter. It has Kurt Russell as R.J. McReady, Wilford Brimley as Blair, who's the biologist in the movie, T.K. Carter as Knowles, the cook, Keith David as Childs, the mechanic, and on and on. But regardless of all of that, most importantly, Patrick, what is The Thing about?
The Thing is a sci-fi horror movie that revolves around an Antarctic research facility with a bunch of scientists and people that live in it, as they are assaulted by, and it doesn't do it justice, but we'll use the term only for right now, a shape-shifting alien. That's only partially what it is. As they do their best to outsmart it and figure out who is and is not the Thing. I can go. Would you like me to go over just like the whole plot now? Because I can do that.
If you have it in brief summary, yeah, sure. Yeah. That's good.
Yeah, the film opens briefly with a sort of run-in with two men that came from another research facility, 100 or so miles away from it, a Norwegian research facility, shooting at a dog. The dog happens to be the Thing, as it has taken over and shapeshifted into a dog. It gets into the facility, infiltrates them, and suddenly they start to not be able to trust one another. Then the main meat of the movie is them evaluating, as they're slowly picked off one by one, how they can tell who is the alien. And then they learn a little bit about the alien, that it's not quite a shapeshifter, it is an assimilator and copier. Because there can be more than one.
Yeah.
So,
and that, I guess that is important. That's true. It's not merely... okay, I see where you're coming with that. Anyways,
yeah.
Keep going.
Shapeshifter just takes it and goes, all right, I'm going to look like that now. But this, if any tiny bit of it gets into your system, it will slowly take over your body and turn you into itself. Because it assimilates, and it's a much more powerful organism. It's very Lovecraftian in nature, because another thing is, we never know what it originally looks like.
True. You kind of assume that it looks like the first form you find, but you pretty quickly realize that that's not the case.
That's not the case.
Yeah.
And it is, the first form is a dog, so we're not going to call this movie The Dog.
Well, okay, yeah. Sorry, I meant the one that they found in the Norwegian
in the ice?
facility. But yeah.
Yeah. So the one they find in the ice, and that's another bit later. So I'll prefix this right now. This is one of my favorite movies, and it's and its prequel from 2011 is one of my least favorite that came from something, but all the work that went into it, I absolutely adored, and it would have been so much better, save for one thing. And the best thing about this particular movie, that a lot of things hold up still. Some of them don't, because it's dated. It's from 82.
Sure.
But they did almost everything in this movie with practical effects in the 1982 version.
Right.
There's only a tiny bit of anything animated, and that's the very start of the movie, which, opens the premise with the spaceship landing in Antarctica.
Oh, yeah.
And that's basically it. Everything else is all practical effects. All the gross goopy bits are all practical.
Yeah.
And so
No,
then the prequel came out and they filmed everything pretty much the same way with updated sort of like technology and stuff to make it practical. And then they put it into post-production for the finishing up and all the touching up and everything. And the producers said essentially that, animation's getting better. Let's just animate everything now. Let's just use CG now. So all of their hard work doing all the practical stuff with modern tech, which would have looked so much better, got covered up by CG. And that's the only
oh,
reason that movie sucks.
really?
Because,
Wow,
yeah.
that's an
But
interesting take.
because eventually you'll need to watch it, maybe not for the podcast specifically, but so I can rant to you about some good use of, and I applaud the movie for constantly doing this because this one does it as well. Continuity.
Uh-huh.
The continuity between the two movies is fantastic, and the continuity in between scenes of this movie is also fantastic. And we'll get to
Okay.
that in a moment. So
Nice.
they're trying to figure out who the thing is.
Right.
There is elements of they're slowly getting picked off one by one. They're starting to lose trust with one another because they have no way of knowing, because the term is near perfect assimilation, near perfect copy.
Mm-hmm.
There's no way to tell unless you can figure out why. So the movie also presents characters who are not just idiots, because they're on the analysis mode. They're trying to figure things out. There's a point where what's the character's name? Fuchs. He's kind of like their primary researcher guy. He has a bit of a lackluster death, but he talks to McCready, which is Kurt Russell's character, who when he says, I don't think we should be making meals for each other. I think we should be eating out of cans and like trying to reduce as much cross-contamination of anything from one another as possible, which is an incredibly wise move if only one particle can cause assimilation.
Right.
And so they're thinking of things that deeply. The only reason people die in the movie probably is because they either didn't know something or they made a mistake. They didn't die because they were stupid.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that was probably one of my most remarkable takeaways from this movie after watching it was, most times when I watch horror, there is an obscene amount of characters who simply die because they're idiots. And you just watch them go down the idiot's path and then, you died like you deserve because you're an idiot, In this movie, I was like, maybe one scene where I was a little questioning of why they did it, but they might have even explained that later. So overall, the movie was very cohesive and logical about, okay, this person is acting logically, or this person is clearly under duress. So what they're doing is
it makes sense in their emotional state.
Yes. So they did very well for that, which, especially considering the genre isn't, at least in my experience, doesn't happen often.
Yeah, and I mean, diamonds in the rough. The problem is horror got so mass-produced that you end up with very common cliches. The final girl circuit for most slashers is always funny because you can always like get a rough idea of how many times they're going to fall running in a straight line.
Exactly.
But yeah, this movie early on, I mean, this is 82. So I believe Alien came out like 3 to 4 years prior, if I recall. So sci-fi horror also wasn't really a thing.
Right.
Alien was the one that started it. 1979. Yeah, Alien came out in 79, so 3 years prior was Alien. And then The Thing came out. It was a box office bomb.
Oh, interesting. Because I know this is like a cult classic.
It is. Because it came out very unfortunately near another very popular Alien movie that kind of switches the entire opposite direction. No. A little alien movie called E.T.
Oh.
So when little kids were like, Mommy and Daddy, take me to go see the Alien movie, I don't remember what it's called, they see E.T. and The Thing, and they're like, let's go watch The Thing. And then their little kids get scarred because they watch a dude's head open up as a mouth and eat another dude's head. So nice. It was a box office bomb because of the time that it came out. And then like not long after that, people were complaining about it's too gross and blah, blah, blah. And then they also just didn't get kind of like the idea of what it was kind of doing, because it's not ghosts It's not scary.
Hmm.
I don't think it's a scary movie at all.
Yeah, I would agree with
It
that.
has some
Yeah.
tense elements.
Hmm.
Horror doesn't need to be scary. I
No.
think
Well, and that's
horror
that's
needs
maybe
to
a
be
whole.
unsettling, and that's different.
Hmm.
Horror needs you to makes you question something fundamental about the characters or about reality. And this specifically is a very good explanation and example of Lovecraftian horror, or or
Huh.
by H.P. Lovecraft,
Right.
popular
Right.
genre author, um,
Yeah.
because his whole thing is incomprehensible creatures.
Hmm.
And we look at
Yeah.
the thing and we go, okay, so it could design a ship. It landed in Antarctica, so it's very At the Mountains of Madness by H.P. Lovecraft. But
Yeah.
also, we have no idea what the heck it actually looks like, what it came to Earth looking like. We might have like some pictures of it, but we don't know if this is the first place it's landed. We don't know if this is the last place. We don't know how many places, how many planets it's destroyed at this point, if we're
Right.
accepting the logic. We
Right.
just know that we're somewhere on the chain and it froze out here, but it didn't die.
Yeah, and I think especially with the ending, which we'll get to at some point, it definitely
Yeah.
adds to your description of horror.
Yep.
Yeah, I'll have to dwell on that. Maybe we'll revisit that at the end
Yeah.
because I think that's an interesting point about what makes horror horror.
Yeah.
Especially because
Scary and horror are different, in my opinion.
yeah,
Because like
that'll definitely be
I'd
worth.
sometimes categorize, like I would categorize The Sixth Sense, as we've just discussed it on one of the other episodes, as
Yeah.
a horror movie, but I don't think it's scary. But it's a horror movie, and
Mhm.
we kind of understand
Right.
why. And a lot of
Mhm.
the old classics we can look at in the same vein.
Right, but it's not got the same maybe like this movie doesn't have the same feel to it as say a
No,
Chucky movie does or like
no.
a
A
Annabelle
very
movie does
vulgar
or something
doll
like
is just running around with a knife and yelling at you, and the lady trips. It's like, I feel for that, but I'm not scared. I get what it was going for.
that.
But yeah, no,
Yeah,
like a
yeah.
Chucky, like those sorts of movies. Same thing with like if you look at the original Friday the 13th movies.
Mhm.
They were horror. They were scary because at the time when it came out, it was more of like an unheard of type thing. Like picture
Mhm.
this: after or before 1984, 1985, before that time in
Uh-huh.
LA, it was uncommon to lock your doors
Really?
because a little guy known as the Night Stalker scared the entire state and West Coast entirely, and that spread across the country because this guy would utilize unlocked doors and he'd just break into people's homes and commit worse than heinous acts.
Hmm.
So that was in the 80s. That was the mid 80s. So this movie came out before that. So there's a general like way that you also have to attack the time that you're in with the movie to make it scary. Friday the 13th
True.
did that. This movie
True.
kind of like took the ideas that were presented first in like Alien, but brought it to a more realistic setting. Earth, it's a research
Okay.
facility, but it's
Right, right.
also a place that naturally we don't comprehend well.
You mean just because it's in Antarctica and most of us don't have a reference for that? Yeah. Yeah.
And
Okay.
so it starts to build its premise in something that we know exists. It's realistic in the sense that like they're all wearing sunglasses.
Mhm.
And you know, when you're younger, you don't realize why you have to wear sunglasses and shades and things that block light from hitting your eyes
Yeah.
in those sorts of environments because it's light reflection, and they're sticking to that
Right,
continuity
right,
as well. They
right.
present a more realistic idea of like when the Norwegians attack at the start of the film. They don't think that there's something wrong with the dog. They thought maybe we're at war with Norway.
Yeah, exactly. That's the first
And
thing
it's
the
like,
guy
it's
says.
the
Yeah,
80s. It's the
yeah.
80s, you know?
We're
Anything
in the
could have
middle of the
happened at
Cold
that point.
War.
Cold
Yeah,
War's
yeah.
going on. Yeah. We don't know if Russia pulled something wacky in that time frame or whatever. But yeah, so all of their like conjecture you know, all the dialogue and stuff that goes on makes sense in its context. And so like when
Yeah.
people start getting assimilated and they start acting just a little weirder. Case in point, I'm trying to remember. I always forget the
Well,
one dude's
yeah.
name.
Yeah, we'll get to it, I'm sure.
But yeah, so basically, they go through the whole miasma of trying to figure out how to determine
Mhm.
who the thing is, and then they come up with one way, which is sabotage before it can even happen, and then
Right,
they
with
have
the
to come
blood.
up with another way by doing the infamous blood test scene with a hot
Yes.
needle and blood,
Yes.
which has a fantastic payout. I love it. Also, fun fact is that this movie came out before the two computer giants were a thing, but Mac and Windows are both characters in this movie.
I didn't even think of that. Yeah, their names. Okay. Okay.
The thing
It's
narrows down their group to a smaller number, and they eventually come to the point where, and this is just kind of like general vagaries over the end game of the movie. So if you want me to save that,
sure, we can hit that when we get to it.
cool.
Or honestly, if people are watching or listening to this, if you have any inclination based off what we've said so far,
Please
if you
watch the
want to
movie.
watch it, obviously we have some huge fans of the room, so they would highly
Yes,
recommend it. I would say it was pretty solid. Definitely give it a watch before you get the spoilers at the end.
yeah.
But with that out of the way, you could go ahead and just spiel it out.
All right, so I saw this movie in theaters again for the 40th anniversary in 2022, and the wider aspect ratio and the bigger screen helped me to see some things, and it was actually really good for that. That being
Interesting.
said, the ending was a lot more magnificent because there's a big explosion, but we'll get to that in just a sec. They
Okay.
Once they're narrowed down to about 3 to 4, they go to check on one of the doctors that kind of went mad at the idea of, if this thing gets out of the research facility, the world is dead.
Right.
No one's going to be ready for that.
Yeah.
He goes mad. They go over to like administer the blood test that they did to the others, and he's gone. So it's a mad scramble to find where he's at. But also, they come to the realization that there's no way they can leave the facility. There's a massive storm coming that's already hitting them. They're just at the start of it, and the only thing they can do is try to kill it before it kills them, and then they'll freeze to death.
Yeah.
They're very
knew they were
noble in that movie. They knew they were going to die, and they knew what they needed to do. And I love that about this movie, is because once that point hit, they knew, and they were like, "Yeah, let's do it. Let's do it. Let's save the planet, and let's never get recognized for it."
Yeah.
And this is the thing that like always tripped me out about the movie, was like, there's a whole tunnel system underneath everything, which I never even thought about when I first watched this movie. And since then, I've done a lot of research on like what it's like to live out there. And it looks so much more comfortable now, to be honest. But the thing has been in the tunnel system, and it's recreating a small UFO to try to get off the planet,
Right.
or at least land somewhere else.
Right.
They're able to sweep it out with explosions and stuff. There's a hilarious one-liner with Kurt Russell when he does a front roll dive thing, front flip roll, whatever, and throws dynamite at the thing. It's so good. He's the only survivor of the expedition that went in to go and blow everything up.
Oh yeah.
And then at the end, he's sitting there by a fire, waiting to freeze to death, and one of the other guys that disappeared in the storm shows up. And they both say they're not in any shape to do anything about it. He says, "We'll just wait here and see." And the movie ends. Because they don't know who's who. They don't know if it's true.
Yeah.
And that's the end of that movie. And I love that movie because there's so many different ways that you can interpret who the thing is. There's actually a comic book continuation that tells you.
Oh my gosh.
Because it didn't get the budget to do a sequel in the 80s because it flopped in the box office. So John Carpenter and a couple people put together a graphic novel series to kind of like continue the story there.
Interesting.
And I'm not going to say who. If anyone really wants to know, look it up.
Yeah, that's probably good, because I definitely think that there is some play with the ending there for sure. But we will get to that for sure.
Yep.
So now rewinding a little bit before we get into the full deep analysis, although we've kind of dabbled in that a bit already. Patrick, on the 9-point scale, did you have a overall value points that you gave it?
It gave me something, but I kind of like sometimes feel like the nuance of certain things makes it hard to say. Out of 9, it gave me an 8.05.
Okay. There you go.
Which I'd say it's around that range, obviously maybe a bit higher, but that's how it is.
So mine gave me a 6.5 or 6.55. So I'm excited to see where the differences are and
for
see
sure.
if you can you can pull me up a little bit from where I'm
Yeah.
at. But yeah, let's get
I'll
into
do
it.
my
So
best.
clearly you're a fan, so I'm excited to see where your head is on some of these thoughts. The opener, first off, did the opener catch your attention, really get you engaged with the plot?
It kind of goes 0 to 100 immediately, but not in a overdone way. It's 0 to 100 as far as like concept, so it's like, oh, you're following this guy. Why are they trying to shoot at the pretty dog?
Mm-hmm.
What's going on? Also fun little tidbit too, because I'll consider the opener up until they go over to the
back to the
Norwegian facility.
Yeah.
The Norwegian guy that they shoot tells you everything you need to know about the movie.
If you know Norwegian.
If you know Norwegian. He does. I'm trying to find exactly what he said. Because it's very funny.
No, I know for myself, I really enjoyed the opener. I think it wasn't like one of those ones that's in your face, like a Mission Impossible movie, right? But at the same time, it also was still it was interesting, and also there was enough things. I love it when they have a couple things off, right?
Yes.
So it's like, oh, the world is fine, but why are they shooting at the dog? And okay, now this guy is dropping grenades, and now he's shooting the person, like who's got petting the dog. You know, like it devolves pretty quickly. Once
it gives you a bunch of things that tells you that things are falling apart in a way, but some of this stuff is so innocuous we don't even recognize it, because the dog immediately goes up to one of the men and starts licking his face.
Yeah.
Which is not good. That's his death sentence right there.
Oh, I'm trying to remember which one it was even who.
It was the dude that when they were in the storage room, he was like tight, like he had like the tentacle that had come off the burned body.
And he was like tied to the chair. The ginger.
Yeah. The Norwegian says, "Get the hell away. It's not a dog. It's some sort of thing. It's imitating a dog. It isn't real. Get away, you idiots." And then he starts shooting again.
Nice.
And they simply just don't know. So one moral of this movie could be learn Norwegian, I guess. Learn another language. It could save from being assimilated by the alien.
This podcast is sponsored by Duolingo.
Rosetta Stone. Is Rosetta Stone still a thing?
In some places. My parents still use it for my siblings, but...
I always really like the intro, because if you don't know what's going on, everything seems innocuous. When you've watched it a few times and you recognize some of the things that are happening, you know why the Norwegian acted the way he did. And he is also a character in the prequel from 2011 as well. His name is Lars.
Yeah, I was curious when you mentioned that the 2011 film is actually a prequel, if it goes into those scientists or not.
It goes into all of that. The prequel ends with them chasing the dog.
Oh, really?
Yep.
Nice.
Sets up for this one. Works pretty well.
Yeah.
Works pretty well. And the big thing is, like, since the prequel takes place in the Norwegian base, all of the stuff you see in the Norwegian base is painfully put back together exactly like that for it. Including a seemingly innocuous axe in the wall.
Yeah.
That's put there in the prequel movie and left there perfectly. It's so good.
Yeah. No, so they started off pretty solid, I'd say. Yeah. What did you think about the main character, especially Mac?
MacReady is both not complex and complex, but there's a reason why. And this is just from watching it and kind of like taking in the context of everything. MacReady really seems like he's not a flawed guy, but he also opens up by starting with not really liking being beat by something. So he's very type A. We'll start with that. Very type A. But the other thing is what is his role? He's the helicopter pilot. Right? Amongst a bunch of scientists.
Yeah.
As far as like standard like rankings that you'd put people, he's kind of lower on the totem pole.
Exactly. Yeah.
But you can also tell that they've already hammered all of that out, because he already has like a ton of gravitas.
Yeah.
And everyone respects him because not, always be friends with the pilot, but also like he's very much the doer. And his only flaw in this movie is everyone's flaw, and that's they don't have the knowledge base to work with.
So I do agree with you definitely that he's complex but not complex, right?
Yeah.
I wouldn't maybe put it quite in the words you did, but I see the angle you're coming with. So maybe just to like add to it from my perspective,
Yeah.
I think you do get the sense from that introductory scene that he's a little bit of a short temper. He's a little bit selfish, where he's like, I don't really want to go and check out this Norwegian place right now. And then
he doesn't even
like,
care to call them Norwegian. He keeps calling them Swedes.
yeah, I don't want to go check out the Swedes, And then they're like, no, like we really need to do this, blah blah blah. But at the end of the day, he also is a man who will take on responsibility when he needs to, and that really clicks in when what's the researcher's name?
Fuchs.
Yeah, Fuchs. When Fuchs talks to him in the bulldozer or whatever it was. And then he really, from that point forward, realizes his responsibility and takes on the burden of being the leader in this situation.
Yeah, he takes it. I don't think he's ever he doesn't want responsibility.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But he assumes it when he knows that he needs to be the one to do it. Case in point, after Blair, the doctor, goes mad and starts shooting people up, or trying to shoot people up in the radio room.
Yeah.
Windows has a freak out and he runs to go break open the weapon vault. And there's a confrontation that happens there where the sort of leader, Gary, he basically says, I'm not able to be in charge of this anymore. And he tries to pass it off to Norris, who we'll get to in a bit. Norris says, I'm not up for it. And then Childs, or Keith David's character, steps in. And everyone knows that while McCready kind of has a short temper,
nothing like
Childs is so much shorter. So they're like, no, and I also pointed out as a fun thing, because I was streaming it for some friends before I got in here, just as a refresher on some things. That's not a stabbing knife that the guy that works at the dogs has. That's just a bad move. That kind of knife, don't do that. Not a wise move. But he takes the gun and assumes responsibility after realizing that no one there is up for it.
Yeah.
And anyone that wants to be up for it should definitely not be. That's when he steps in and takes it.
Yeah.
So he doesn't want responsibility, and that could be seen as a flaw.
Well, I don't know that that's... I mean, you could take that two ways, right? You could see it as a flaw. You could also see it as humility. Or you could see it as laziness. It's very interesting, because the question then becomes like, what is the motivation for why you don't want their responsibility?
I sometimes wonder if it's because he kind of has I'm not a part of this group type thing, because he doesn't even live with them.
Yeah, he has his own little shack that he lives in.
He has his own shack. Yeah. He's not even there with them unless it's probably to eat.
Yeah.
Maybe he doesn't want to be with them.
Yeah.
Maybe it's something like that. I don't know. It never really explores that.
Yeah.
It could have, but I think also if it went too deeply into that, it might have kind of lost touch with the other themes it was trying to go for as well.
And we'll get to the themes for sure.
Yeah.
But what about the side characters? Did you feel like the side characters were pretty well developed in this universe?
Everyone had appropriate depth to their characters based on the length of time they spent in the movie.
Yeah. And so here's the other thing. The reason this question is important is because ideally, you want to create, in order to create a compelling scenario, you want to create characters that are motivated in such a way that they are motivated for their own gain, which is separate from everyone else's gain. And now, and this movie is probably the perfect example of a situation where you can put everyone in the same situation and they will all act, or will seemingly try to act selfishly. Yes. Where, okay, they all have the same desire to survive, right? But they're going to act differently based on that because of their personality. So some person might act responsible. Someone else is going to run off and hide. Someone else is going to go insane. Someone else is actually an alien and they want to get close to other people. All of those things are perfectly developed as a situation to create a setting where there is internal conflict between the cast.
And if you want to see the roots of where a lot of the reactions come from, before it even establishes itself as a threat, when they get back from the Norwegian facility and they bring back the body with them, which I think is hilarious because that's a lot of extra work to put on everyone. And the guy that goes there, the doctor that went there made them do it anyways. I thought that was funny. But
you mean bring the body back?
Bring the big body back, the one with the
Yeah.
like the molded face. Yeah.
Yeah.
They have their own different priorities about how they're handling things. Like Palmer, the stoner, is sitting there and he's rambling off about aliens. The child's chariots of the gods, man. They practically own South America, is what he says, and I think that's hilarious. But he just doesn't care, and he'll only do things when he like thinks he has to, and he'll still try to get out of it.
Yeah.
And then you have Childs, who just is just so angry all the time and just doesn't want to be there. You can tell.
Yeah.
It's like he was assigned there, but it doesn't ever explore him as much, except for the fact that he's just kind of a bad-tempered man.
So, no, go ahead.
I was going to say, Gary himself has, like, they refer to him as Captain, so he's implied to have been from the military. He's got his old pop gun, and he clearly didn't want to have to use it, but he knew how to, so there's a lot of implied stuff with Gary.
Well, he's also the leader at the base.
He's technically the leader.
Yeah.
He's technically the leader. And I think that they established him as that maybe only because he is a captain or was a captain. Copper is the doctor, and he very much acts as the doctor. Fuchs isn't explored as much. Windows is a very weak man. He's very cowardly up until he is forced to not be. But the entire time, he's one of the main ones that only acts in self-preservation. And it makes sense.
Right. And he's the radio operator, right?
Yeah, that's the radio operator.
Yeah.
Yep. He's also just got a bad attitude. Which, I mean, it makes sense if you're out there and you don't hear from anyone. Yeah. Let me see here. A lot of the other ones do kind of fall by the wayside a bit.
Sure. And that's most of the ones that are explored in the movie. But I do think that drives to the point that even though they all have the same motivations, they have very different personalities, like you just explored. And so that also helps create the conflict. Because if everyone was all, responsible and noble to some degree, like Mac was, then at the end of the day, they probably would have worked together to try to solve this problem.
Yes, but it would have happened way sooner.
But because you have these very different personalities working in this environment, that's where you get all of this conflict. And so that was an excellent addition for the movie.
And then the thing utilizes that.
Yes.
It sows distrust, and then comes this part of the movie. The distrusting part. The not knowing who is who's real and who isn't. And then that point where it makes you question whether or not you've been rooting for it the whole time, when they kind of bring to the table when Knowles, the cook, goes up to McCready's shack and finds the jacket and breaks the line so that McCready gets lost. Yeah. That part, all within reason. 100% within reason.
Yeah.
But at the end of this, I'm just going to explore, towards the end of the podcast, I want to go over a brief little thing about, the timeline of things, because there are entire, studies done to figure out the way that certain things happened. Who slashed the blood bags? Who put the burnt clothes, the torn clothes in McCready's shack? Who took the keys? All very important plot elements, but they never technically get answered. Because by the end of the day, do they need to? They don't need to.
Right, exactly. And that's the thing. Is do you, in a good story, do you need to explain everything, or can you give enough plausible deniability for the situation that you tell the story and then move on? And I think that oftentimes it's better to have some questions that could be explained away but aren't fully explained for the sake of being concise with the story itself and telling that as best as you can.
Yep. And a big thing is, if the movie gives you everything you need. It does. It does. It gives you everything you need. The main question, as far as for the keys and the blood bag, they lead to the same thing. He who got the keys got to the blood bag.
Right. Easy.
When did they get the keys?
Right.
And it's just a quick little thing that could be completely overlooked when you're watching it. But when Windows goes into the storage room where the dead thing is at, when he sees Bennings, the ginger, getting assimilated, he runs.
Right.
He runs and he goes and warns everyone. But for one split second, you hear him drop the keys.
Oh, that's right.
Which
Yeah.
means Bennings. It's either Bennings or if anyone else was assimilated, he got the key. They got the keys then. So it's
But
within
was it
reason to think that Bennings took it after his assimilation, or it could have been
Wait, so
Norris
Bennings okay, but
ran
Bennings
out of the building and then got burned.
uh
It's a situation of we have all the information we need. The only element that we think might be complicating the factor is time. How much
right.
time
So
did
the
he have?
question right, when did Bennings get converted into an alien? Yeah.
And it happened right then. He dropped the keys in front of Bennings, who was getting assimilated.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
that's when he ran and warned everyone. So it could be, and there's never any solid answers to these, but there's highly probable and not probable ones. It's more probable that Bennings took the keys, but in my opinion, we see the first person present getting assimilated at the very start of the movie when the dog is roaming through the base. It goes to a room and there's a silhouette of a person. Back then, it was harder to tell who it was. But when you watch the movie now, that silhouette is Norris, the guy whose stomach opens up.
Okay.
So if he's the thing, Bennings' thing hands off the keys to Norris. Norris goes and does the thing while everyone's chasing Bennings, and then he comes out and plays his part.
Yeah.
And you don't need it to do any of this. You don't need to read into any of this to get the experience of the movie. This is just the fact that it gives you so many puzzle pieces just to have fun with.
Yeah. And I think that was part of the intent, especially of that scene early on, where you see the dog. They don't know that it's the alien yet.
Yep.
But as the audience, you kind of have an inkling, especially if you have any sort of description of the movie. Yeah. That the dog is probably the bad guy. So, seeing him walk into that area, you feel like, okay, that had some significance. And at least gives you that seed of, okay, something happened to someone when the dog was in there. And so that's the kind of thing that they did very well, was putting these little plants of, okay, this is odd, this is odd, this is odd. And then really just giving you the full experience afterwards, where you have these opportunities to go, okay, that was there for a reason. This was there for a reason.
So with all of these puzzle pieces and things, and me presenting that whole situation of like, we don't need to know the answers to any of these. We don't need the answers to know what happened, technically, because the end of the movie still comes regardless of solving the puzzle.
Right.
Did you find the setting of it all believable?
Oh, for sure.
I'm turning it back around on you, buddy.
Yeah, no. I would say that, like, these first couple points, right, they started off really well, right? Yes. I took, like, a little bit away from, like, is the main character well developed?
Yeah.
So not a lot, but, like, overall they all got great or awesome stars from me.
Yeah.
Because it was like they did very well with opening this film. And that's a very good start. I think anything, honestly, that is above a 6 usually has a pretty solid opening. And this was definitely the case. And honestly, most of my stuff that I took away from was more on the back end anyways.
Yeah.
And so that's where I have a bigger issue, but they started off quite well. I didn't think, so it's in our universe, right? So there's not a lot that you have to be, does it make sense? But the big
there's
thing
not
is
a lot of rule
alien
changes that we have to account for or anything like that.
Exactly.
Yeah, of course.
But the aliens itself, like, did they explain enough that it felt like the rules they set up for how this alien assimilated other people and whatnot, did that make sense? And I thought that they explained plenty there to make it very believable. Yeah. What about yourself?
100% believable. There's only 2 rules that we really need to accept for this movie to make sense, and it's not anything that you really need to, like, stretch to accept for a movie. And that is that there are aliens and that it can assimilate.
Right.
And that's about it.
Right.
And it's like, that's the crux of the movie. Go for it, man.
Right. Well, sometimes they have things like, so as a example, oftentimes there's the classic, there's time travel. We're going to go back in time and stop this thing. But it's sometimes when you introduce an element like that, it just adds so much more complexity and adds questions about how that fundamentally works that it starts to fall apart. or
Yeah.
if you watch the
And
Marvels,
all of
and
the
they
things
have.
that
Go ahead.
all
Go
the
ahead.
things that this movie makes you question are all things that are still grounded in reality. The things that
Right.
it makes you wonder about, like the continuity of things. How did it do this and this at the same time?
Mhm,
Well,
mhm.
there can be two of them. That's been established already.
Right.
And various things like that. It doesn't alter our reality in any way apart from adding two things that if they didn't exist, the movie would still be available to take place. There'd still be a research facility. There'd still be the people there. If the
Yeah.
alien and the thing didn't happen there, then it'd just be a bunch of guys surviving in the snow. That's it.
Yeah.
It doesn't
Yeah.
have any mass effect on anything.
Yeah.
Just them there. It could have,
Mhm.
and that's where the threat of the film came in, is that it could be worse.
So that was awesome. What did you think about really getting the characters involved in the conflict? Did you think that Mac or any of the other main characters stood for anything, or that this was really brought in as an important conflict for where they were at?
Like where they were at in their character development, or
Just in regards to their lives personally, and this one's kind of dumb in this case because obviously it was important for them because they either live or they
because
die.
survival. Yeah,
Yeah.
but I think the movie doesn't explore that kind of thing that much, at least in
Right.
my opinion.
Uh-huh.
Only because it's very isolated in many aspects of that and uses of that word.
Mhm.
The characters aren't like they're not reaching out, they're not reading letters to their loved ones at home or anything like that.
Right,
It's a
right.
bunch of dudes being bros as scientists,
Yeah,
and an
exactly.
alien gets in there.
Yeah,
And the character development that happens, in my opinion, there is still some, and the
right,
effect of the whole the conflict is it's there, it affects it, but it's subtle.
right, right.
For me, I think it's just very subtle because, like, we look at how it affects Mac. Mac is
Mhm.
reluctant, I think, because he wants to be lazy and he's selfish.
Right, right,
And by the end, he is doing the least selfish act.
right.
And
Yeah,
some of the other men go and do. And it's not about, like, and that's the whole point of the movie, was it's not about their individual identities. It's about why, reasons why to question it. And that's one of the
right.
main things of the movie, is identity and questioning and the self and
Hmm.
growth.
Yeah,
Would a thing have
yeah.
any development? Technically, yes.
Hmm.
It does. It
That's
learns.
interesting. Yeah, yeah. That's an interesting aspect to take because yeah, okay. Yeah, I would definitely say for in regards to the characters within the movie, like you said, they don't have a bunch of individual character development. There's a little bit with Mac, which goes
Yeah.
exactly with what you said. So I didn't think that I didn't give it no points for this for sure. I probably gave it
Yeah.
about middle of the road for this.
Yeah.
But like you said, it wasn't the focus of the movie. The focus of the
Yeah.
movie was definitely on the alien and the horror there.
Yeah.
So yeah, did you think that this movie was really good at taking characters and putting them in worse situations
Oh,
consistently?
yeah. Every
And
single
what
time
do
the
you think?
thing shows
Yeah.
up, it just
Uh-huh.
gets worse. Because
Uh-huh.
the first time we see the thing, is technically the dead one. If I recall, it's the
The
dead one,
Norwegian
the
guy that they pick
Norwegian one
up. Yeah.
that they dissect. No,
Yeah.
did they dissect it? Yeah,
They
they
did,
did.
yeah.
They
They
did.
found all the organs and whatnot, yeah.
And then the thing happens with the dogs.
Mhm, yeah,
So not human yet. We haven't seen anyone get attacked by it yet. And
right,
then it happens to one of them, and
right,
there's only minor transformation. His hand hasn't quite completely gone back to normal yet.
right,
It's still learning. It's still trying to take its time to do things. And then it
right.
gets worse again, because if I recall, after him,
Well, yeah, and
it's
he's
Fuchs. A lot of things happen in this movie that are kind
mhm,
of like, it almost has like the buildup of like an Agatha Christie, as pieces are falling into place, but you don't know when they're going to happen. And then when there's a
right,
moment of payoff, it's like, oh, all those pieces there's still some stray pieces. Where did those go? And then they go back later somewhere else.
right,
Um, Escalating situations. Each time they encounter the thing, it gets worse. There's the blood test. The blood test happens after they deal with the one. No, what's his name? I always forget the one dude's name. Norris. Norris has a heart
the
attack,
yeah,
and they
and
go
they
to
resuscitate him.
they do the resuscitation paddles, and his stomach
Yeah,
opens up into one mouth. Um,
yeah,
yeah, and that part's gross. I love it. I love it so much. But that's my reputation here.
Yes.
And so that one's pretty bad because it like spreads all around the room, and then the head
Yeah.
falls off and becomes a spider. Now there's two of them.
Yes, and that was actually a significant part to the movie because that's when it gave Mac the realization that there is individual, almost like each section of the alien is its own entity.
Each
and
part
that
is a whole.
All of it wants to survive.
Yep,
Versus,
all of it wants to survive, and that's what gives him the idea to let's test some blood.
Yeah, exactly.
And there was this thing that was I'm trying to remember who or where I read it from, but there was a suggestion that the size of the creature, of the relative size of the thing, also tells you how complex its thoughts are. So the head will not be as smart as that whole body was. Which is why, if you're bigger, case in point, I think the blood test goes over this, and it just nobody thinks about it. The blood test has technically two tests to it: stabbing the thumb and hurting them, and then testing the blood.
Right.
Because you're still stabbing the thing.
Right. Well, that's what I was curious about, is if because I thought when they initially were going to stab them, it was instantly going to transform, and that didn't happen.
I think that's what lends itself to the idea that the larger they are, the more complex their relative thought patterns and their cognition is, and the fact that I think the bigger they are, the better they are at lying about what they are.
Right. It's almost like because they've assimilated more.
Yeah, because it can get poked a little bit, it can tell itself, don't react, just wait. And then it drips the blood, but now the blood is also a hole, and the blood is tiny, and the blood's going to act like an animal instead, and it's going to freak out, and that's what it does.
Yeah.
And then in the blood test scene, it shoots to the ceiling for a second, lands on the ground, and then eats windows. And then they blow it up, and then burn windows.
Yeah. No, and I think that your point on the Agatha Christie point was kind of appropriate, because there was a certain aspect in which this movie had that murder mystery type of situation where you're going, okay, we know that someone's going to die. It was, you know what I thought of when I was watching this movie? I was like, this was the precursor to Among Us.
Yeah. So there are so many memes about that. There are so many. Yes. I'll find some right now while we're talking. 100%.
I was just like, wow. So they're literally looking for this guy before it murders them. Okay, there we go. Here we are.
Yeah.
One of you is an imposter. But yeah, there's like okay, can we find the imposter before they come and kill us, right? And that was this whole situation where they kept tying people up and interrogating them. All right, everyone's free now. All right, everyone's tied up again. All right, who can we trust?
Precursor to Among Us. It technically falls into the very definition of a whodunit.
Yeah.
And sometimes the complicating factor with this one is the fact that it may be a whodunit. It's not a Poirot murder mystery, but it's also one where perhaps even the thing, when playing as one of the other people, they technically don't know. How much consciousness does it assimilate? We don't know. We don't have that information. And that's part of the Lovecraftian nature of it, is because it's already breaking rules of things that we understand. So we don't know what its limitations are. And the more we try to comprehend it, the more insanity we fall into.
Right. Yeah. And it's interesting because these characters, right, you can see, especially early on when it's assimilating people, it doesn't have that full cognition that the other characters
the first
maybe
one
do.
That gets assimilated. Bennings, the ginger, he doesn't even play the part. He just looks at MacReady and does a funny roar.
Yeah, exactly. And then the next one, which I think, so I will say the only thing that, and this wasn't even a huge diss at this point in the movie, but it's more like is that, okay, so how do, the words I'm trying to say is, it was somewhat predictable.
Yeah.
In that, like, you knew someone was going to die, someone was going to be revealed. Yeah. That being said, even with having that foreknowledge, it's almost like, and maybe this is a thing that's so great about horror movies, is that you can know there's a jump scare, right?
Yes.
but the jump scare will still get you, and that's or not,
Yes and
maybe not
no.
always, but
It depends. There's a lot that depends on, and it's like the point is expectations, right? Jump scares
right,
play off of your expectations. The problem is
right,
I hardly ever get jump scared by anything, and that isn't any fault of a movie. That's a fault of mine.
sure,
That being said, there are some movies that do jump scares that I can predict that are really good, and some movies that can do jump scares that I can predict that are very bad. I can still
right,
predict them almost to the exact moment. But
right,
what's the difference between whether they're good or bad? Writing and how well they're done. If it's
right,
shoehorned in there, garbage. If
right,
there's
right,
a
right,
really good way to build up to it in a way that like makes sense, and there's
hmm
intrigue because it uses your intrigue too, that's how it garners attention, then heck yeah, that's a really good jump scare when it has the payoff. If it does it well enough, there you go. My favorite
right.
jump scare still comes from the movie Hereditary, which eventually you'll watch, but it isn't your traditional jump scare, and that's why.
uh-huh,
There's no
yeah,
way to
you
predict
keep
that one.
dragging me into this genre over here.
Soon,
Um,
soon, soon,
um,
my little grasshopper.
yes, exactly. So I think maybe this speaks to the horror genre as a whole, where because I don't. So personally, my
Yeah,
personal experience with the horror genre, I don't love the horror genre. That
of
being
course.
said, I respect the horror genre, and the
Yeah.
reason I respect it is because there are many times where you're in a situation just like what I said, where you know what's going to happen, but at the same time, you are still so almost like emotionally used by the movie that it still gets you.
Hmm.
Even if it's a jump scare or it's some other scare or whatever it's doing, it's like it bypasses the mental circuitry, the logical circuitry in your brain, and hits you right at the emotional point and just shakes you like a bag of coins, right?
And that's the thing, that's the allure of horror movies for me, is because it bypasses your logic by
Hmm.
presenting, and there's multiple ways you can do this, but most of the time it's by being somewhat grounded in something realistic, be it the setting or the characters. And then
Hmm.
you feel for the characters, and then when things start to happen, it's not like you're fearing for your life. You're not in the
No.
movie, but you're fearing for the
Oh
characters'
gosh.
lives because you've gotten to feel as the characters feel for them in whatever method they use.
Right.
But that's also another thing that the horror movie genre I think has going for it, but is also its hardest um, sort of hurdle to get through. Is fear is subjective. Fear is subjective. People are afraid of different things. So how can you make a movie and call it a horror movie if you're trying to shoehorn what you think people are going to be afraid of into it? And it's difficult because some movies just straight up aren't scary because I don't fear those things.
Yeah. Okay. Yes. I I sort of agree with you. So I
The
think that okay. Finish your thought, and I'll
the
say
way
mine.
it works is
Uh-huh.
it doesn't have to only go by your fears. It has to go
Right.
by how the character perceives the thing that is
Right.
causing them fear. And
Hmm.
that's the thing, is you have to make it well enough to where you can um I'm trying to remember, suspend your disbelief
Right. Exactly right.
as
Yep.
the character does.
Yep.
As the character lives in their reality, you have to suspend your disbelief to accept and do more than just accept, but feel for that character in the way that you would also pick up on their fears. Because I
Right.
think the most hilarious thing to say about the horror movie genre as a whole is that it has the biggest grip and use and manipulation of human empathy. And I think that's hilarious because so do
Uh,
sociopaths.
that's a
Uh,
wonderful note.
but that's ultimately like in the film, that's how it works. You're
Right.
using empathy, you're empathizing with the character, and that's
Hmm.
how we start to take on their fears. I didn't fear for myself in this movie when I first watched it. I feared for
Right.
the characters, and that got kind of scary because if
Hmm.
that's true for the movie and the concept is a little weird, suddenly a dude's head splits open. You're like, this is not part of the rules. What do I do with this?
No, and that's. I think you hit it right on the head because there are and the relative amount I think that those scares will affect you
Mm-hmm.
is definitely proportional, like you said, to how how much you are actually maybe scared of those things in real life, right?
Yeah.
So a giant spider showing up in playtest during the Black Mirror episodes might not
Yeah.
be scary to you if you're not scared of spiders, but
Yep.
if you get engaged with the character and care emotionally what happens to them because you have
Mm-hmm.
this empathy for where they're at, then you're going to at least feel some sort of fear for them because you know they are scared of the spider.
Yeah.
And that's
Exactly.
what's important. So, no, I thought I would disagree with you, but after explaining it, I 100% agree with you.
Yeah.
You honestly hit the nail on the head on that one. Yeah.
Perfect.
Nice. Anyways,
Okay.
cool. So, is there any big revelations in this movie?
Not in the standard sense where you'd find like revelation. For me, at least when I read that term, I always think like plot twist or something, or like the denouement when the pieces come together. This movie is filled with a bunch of small revelations, small
Yeah, and
keys to solving the problem.
right, and it's so yeah, and maybe this should be better defined on the 9-point system, but when I think of revelations, right, you're thinking of something that can take the movie and turn it in some ways on its head. Sometimes it's the climax as well, and
Yeah.
so it fulfills both keys. Sometimes it doesn't, right?
Yeah.
And so that can be anything from, like we've talked about with Malcolm in The Sixth Sense, where it's like,
Yes.
oh, he's already dead.
Yep.
Or Darth Vader when he says, I am your father, or something like that.
Yeah.
That is a big revelation that changes everything. Or,
Yes.
for example, if you've watched the Attack on Titan series and you see one of the two, when what's his name says, hey, I'm the Colossal Titan and he's the Armor Titan or whatever.
Yeah.
That's a big, 180 from everything that's happened before. So it's those kinds of things that you're looking for when you're looking for a revelation, that it takes a lot of what's happened before and really just flips what it means.
Yep.
Right.
Oh yeah.
And so I think,
I don't think this movie has any big one. Like,
Right.
I'll just restate what I said. This movie isn't full of big revelations. It's full of small revelations that are used as keys to survive the situation.
Right.
It's not like in
Like
this kind of
foreshadowing
situation.
type of thing.
Yeah, it's foreshadowing. It's things like like with the dogs. What it was trying to do was trying to get to the other dogs, but it had to touch them. So then they're like, okay, well, it has to touch things in order to do that. Any amount of it, blah blah blah. So now we know not to touch it. It will act in its own self-defense at any size. That's another revelation. Blair is one of them now, and it's trying to escape. That's another revelation. And then we can just go down by like that. But movies do that all the time. This one, I think, makes it so that those have a lot more weight to the story and to the whole thing. It's not like we're waiting for, Blair is actually the king of the things and is just trying to serve. If it did something like that, I'd be like, nope, bad. Don't do that. But no, I can't say there was a big revelation. I would say that collectively, everything that they had to learn in such a short amount of time, in my opinion, is equivocal to it, but it doesn't have the same kind of impact that a big revelation would have. But also, I don't think it needed it.
No, and like definitely, I think so when it comes to good movies, and I've said this for other guests as well, the revelations section is almost like this is where if you can get points here, this is what puts you in the cream of the crop of movies, right? If you can get points in this area, this is where you get that 9 out of 9 perfect score area, and it's hard to really get those for a reason, is because oftentimes it's hard to tell a good story and also subvert expectations at the same time.
Yeah.
Right. Because otherwise, oftentimes, if you're doing that, you're breaking some rule or you're completely changing the fundamentals of the story at that point in some way that doesn't make sense. So it's very difficult to do. But that's what makes it remarkable when you can.
I look at it like even that requires it to be put in its context. Because like we didn't start getting extra big twists that changed the entire thing like that until there were rules that were established. Exactly. And this is one of those movies that helped to establish the rules. So for me...
Oh, you mean of a genre.
Of a genre. Okay. This helped to establish rules of genre. So for me, while I can't say it had a big twist, the fact of the matter is, I still feel that it deserves those points, even though it didn't do that. Partially because it's a product of its time. So I still said that it does have a big twist, but I have the addendum in my review of it's not a big twist, but it's a bunch of revelations and things that happen throughout the movie to also help twist the plot into the shape that it needs to go.
Right.
There's other stuff that gets added in the secondary in the prequel that also still fits in continuity with this movie, but it's just other ways to go about it. Because they didn't want to rip off the 80s movie, so they took the source material, looked at all of the limitations, all of the implications, and were like, all right. I believe they ran it by John Carpenter too. Like, would this be a way to tell a thing? And when he gave the go ahead, that's what they ran with.
Nice. Yeah.
But
no, and I think so. Some of the revelations, especially going to Briar and his transformation, I think there was some indications of that earlier on of those things occurring, which is maybe why I'm less ready to give points on this area. Is just because they have this foreshadowing of where he goes, "Oh, I'm perfectly fine now. Let me out," and they're all like, "I don't know.
I want to go back inside."
There's something wrong here.
Also, just the black comedy of him opening the slider and there's just a noose.
Yeah, exactly.
But that's also a giveaway because how high was the noose? It was not high enough.
Yeah, exactly.
He's playing the part, but also back then, that kind of thing, this kind of identity horror wasn't really a thing then.
Right.
And this was one of the... there were some, but this was one of the main ones that helped to establish, we can do horror about things other than just spooky ghosts, like in Poltergeist or Amityville or any of those, and we can do something different where the drama and the horror comes from just not trusting your people.
No, and that's very true. And I thought, just going off of what you had said earlier, is that was the perfect maybe transition between what was it? Bennings, then you had Briar, and then you had was it Palmer?
Palmer was the blood test guy.
So you had different iterations of the thing throughout this, where one was very poor, one was okay, but there was still something fishy, and the last one was very convincing until the end.
Yes. Yeah.
And that was what I thought was remarkable, to just thinking about how, when you said, "Oh, the thing changes or develops in this movie and becomes more nuanced," that's what I was thinking of. Was each of these different iterations gets better, gets stronger.
It learns how to act. It learns how to make it look proper. Down to a flaw, because I think the not Knowles, the Norris thing with the stomach. I think because it was a perfect replica of Norris, it also replicated his weak heart, which was established earlier on. And so when it had a heart attack, it had to play the part. And I think at that point it was panicking. And that's what led afterwards to
my
the blood
host
scene.
is dead. What do I do?
My host would have died here. What am I going to do? Mouth.
Yeah, exactly.
It's fun.
So, did you think that the movie had a surprise ending?
But I think it was very climactic with a very good explosion. But I can't say technically that it was a surprise ending. Only because it's an older movie, and if I was to rate it back then, I would have said yes.
Right.
But nowadays, there's so many movies that end on such a kind of a bleak note that this movie didn't surprise me in that sense. I mean, there's literally no way they're going to get out. They tell us that. So because they spoil that, but they also didn't play all their cards even at the end. And that I can say is one of the surprises.
That's actually, this is where I gave it points, where I didn't give it points before, is because of that ending. And that I almost felt like, even watching it, I was like, I feel like they needed to end it in a way like that, where, okay, I don't know how the comics end, right? And this is probably the part where we would get into that. But at the end, you have
McCready and Childs.
Childs and McCready, and they're sitting there. Supposedly they blew up the alien. I'm not even sure how McCready got out of there before that massive explosion occurred, but I was kind of surprised to see he was still alive. But he's, waiting to die anyways. It doesn't really matter in the long-term scheme. But then he sees Childs, and they both don't know if the other one's an alien, right? Which then begs the question, because Childs basically says, "Oh, we should both kill each other so that we guarantee that the alien doesn't survive." And Childs is kind of like, "Uh-huh,
Mm-hmm.
okay." And then they both say, "Well, let's just wait a little bit."
Yep.
And so I wasn't sure as an audience to go, "Okay, does that mean that McCready
You're gonna
actually got
love this.
infected and
You're
he's
gonna
an
love this.
alien? Or does that mean that Child's an alien? Or does that mean both's an alien or none are an alien?" You don't know. And that was
Mm-hmm.
part of this, like, the way that they have this great knockout, cliffhanger, climactic ending was just leaving you with that.
Yep.
You really don't know
You're
how
like,
this ends.
I can't trust it even still.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
this is a fun thing that I'm going to get into now. Two things that are pointed out
Mhm.
in the filmmaking of the movie. Characters that are not the Thing, that are human for sure,
Uh-huh.
have the reflection of the ring light in their eyes.
The ring light.
The ring light from behind the camera, the reflection is in their eyes. Now, it's a general
Oh.
rule. There are a few exceptions, but that's generally one of the ways to tell. There's a theory about the ending of the movie. What did they do with all their bottles and stuff? They turned them into Molotov cocktails. So
Uh-huh.
all of the bottles are filled with gasoline.
And he passed it to him to
McCready
drink.
hasn't had a drink of it. He passes it to Childs, and Childs takes a drink.
Uh-huh.
And then McCready sees him drink, and then kind of smirks and goes, huh. And then that's the end. So it's a theory that the Thing didn't know it was supposed to be gasoline, drank it, and played the part, and that confirmed it for McCready, who could die happy knowing it's going to freeze out here again.
But why did he want? Wouldn't he want to kill it? Isn't that the point?
He's gonna die regardless. It's gonna die and freeze regardless. But he can't guarantee he can kill it now. There's no way.
He couldn't try to shoot it, and I guess that's true.
Shooting it ain't gonna do.
Burn it. He has to.
He'd have to burn it again, and they're out. But also, he just fed it gasoline, so maybe.
Huh.
I feel like I sinned reading the comic book. I'm not gonna lie.
Interesting.
So, who do you think it is?
I mean, I hadn't thought of what you just said, so that's an interesting.
It's still only a theory. It's still
so
only a theory.
I'm going to be honest. I thought that it was McCready.
Okay.
I thought that he was the alien, and the reason is because if he was as high and noble as he portrayed himself to be at that point in the movie, he would have, I think, pushed for them to kill themselves, right? And guarantee the survival of the people. But when he says that, like, oh, let's just wait and see how we feel, more or less, it was almost like a...
Oh, no, that's not wait and see how we feel. Let's wait and freeze to death. Because if you are a Thing, or if you're not a Thing, we've already agreed we're going to die. Let's freeze to death because it's more pleasant than burning to death. That was the reason behind that.
Right, but also the idea, if I understand it, is that there would be a rescue crew that comes in the spring at some point, and then they'll maybe thaw them out, and then they'd be able to resuscitate and go back to their original world domination plan.
Yeah,
the Thing.
Again, ambiguous ending. I've always read into it as, like, you know, for the test thing with the gasoline. I like the gasoline test a lot.
I did think it's very interesting. I agree with that.
Yeah, I like it a lot because what it could also do is it could also help to explain why he's being passive about it now. Because if the Thing knows that he's onto it, what's going to stop the Thing from just killing him?
Right.
Or one killing the other. Technically nothing except opportunity.
Right.
I didn't get to the ending this last watch through for this, and I'm about to go tap over it just to see what's around McCready at the time, because if he's surrounded with more explosives, then that would explain why he's being docile. Because that's 100% something I could see happening right there.
So he is the alien.
Yeah, it depends. I don't think McCready is the Thing.
Okay.
Even after my first viewing, I never thought it was going to be McCready. Because Child's excuse for not being there was all too convenient.
Well, yeah, exactly. And that's I think the intent. That's why I was also kind of going toward, oh, maybe they're both aliens.
Maybe they both are.
And they're just getting that silent agreement at that point, like, okay, this is where we're at. This is what this is what we do. Yeah, and I don't know if that would have to do with passing some sort of biological information by passing the bottle or something like that, but
Yeah, who
to
knows?
acknowledge that they were both aliens, not sure. But obviously, it is interesting to speculate what
Yeah.
actually happens at the end of the movie for sure. Um, did you think? I mean, obviously, I just said I think that McCready may actually be the thing at the end of the movie, but
Hmm.
whether he is or he isn't, does the true human character of Mac grow as a person in this movie?
I think he does.
Uh huh.
I think it's again, I like I said earlier, I think character growth is a lot less visible. It's more of a subtle thing as
Hmm.
far as like guided actions, and not as much like you see the change in their active lives. Because right now, at the end of the movie, you're seeing these characters at their lowest.
Right. Right.
So like growth is a bit harder to see in that situation. But I think Mac grows in a lot of different ways. I've said earlier, he starts off as pretty selfish,
Hmm.
and then
Yeah.
by the end makes the noblest sacrifice. He's the one that tells everyone we're not making it out of here alive.
Right.
So
Right.
let's heat things up a bit. I think is what he
Yeah.
says. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think he grows.
Yeah. No, I said, and honestly, it's very similar to what you thought. I gave it half points on this one because I did think he grew as a person, but it wasn't really a central piece to the story
Yeah,
for who he is and his character development. So it was more of a, if you follow his character, you could definitely see that he grows. But if you're not really following his character, you're not going to really notice it. So
yeah,
because he's the primary character and that does happen, it is worth noting and worth giving them points for it because that
yeah,
does ultimately play into the plot.
yeah.
But it wasn't a very direct thing. So,
Yes,
um,
there's a lot
but
of
yes,
things about this movie.
that's right.
Bad puns,
Uh,
bad puns.
yes. Themes. What did you think? Did this movie have a theme? Several themes?
Several.
The theme?
This was a very like one of the best movies to portray a Lovecraftian theme,
Okay.
Lovecraftian horror theme. Incomprehensible creatures. We don't know what they start to look like or anything like that. This is one of the first movies that really like hammered home that,
Yeah.
and then also trust and identity are big in this one, as well as kind of like a
Yeah.
sort of gravitas nobility to it, like uh, the way that the men act and the sort of things that they have
Right.
to
Right.
accept and work with.
Yeah.
Any of them could have just walked out into the blizzard and died and frozen to death, but they
Right.
didn't.
No, that's absolutely right. I think that also the idea of exploring identity in this movie in a broader sense is interesting because I didn't even think about that, but there is definitely a lot of exploration of that theme for sure in this movie.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I did think of the more generic selflessness for humanity's sake.
Yeah.
Very, very doomsday generic theme there. So
Yep.
I did give it half points. I think just on talking about the identity point, that does raise it because that
Yeah.
is a worthy consideration and just one I hadn't thought of. So that'll definitely give that full points.
Another fun fact is that this is the first movie I believe in his no, it's just the second in John Carpenter's Apocalypse trilogy.
Oh, interesting. Okay. That
First one I
being
believe is called Prince of Darkness, The
okay.
Thing, and then At the Mouth of Madness or In the Mouth of Madness with Sam Neill from Jurassic Park.
Nice.
Now, I've seen
Nice.
two of those. I haven't seen Prince of Darkness. It just seems really weird to me, and eventually I'll get around to watching it. But
Because of course you are the king of horror.
I got don't give me that title because then people will to that, and then they'll be like, "Did you watch this?" And I was like, "No, I didn't. It looked like crap."
Well, I mean, I still say that for
Well,
any type
yeah,
of movie.
yeah. But dude, I'm gonna watch Bad CG Gator. I have to. I have
There's a
to.
couple. There's like I've heard there's one really terrible one called Frogs. Have you seen that one?
Yes, yes, I have. Yep.
Just the way you responded.
If I recall, it didn't
Ugh.
even have much to do with frogs. So I'd say,
Uh,
yeah, there's a lot of themes that are handled in this movie, especially like it being another of the first of the sci-fi horror genre too, but it
uh-huh.
didn't heavy-hand the sci-fi part of it, which I think was
Right.
very good about it.
Well, it's interesting too because especially as you harp on this a little bit, but the idea that this is a movie that in some ways started this maybe a smaller niche genre, but still a genre of different types of movies, and creates a
Yeah.
framework for them to work off of, right?
Yeah.
There are, and I'm trying to think back. There's the original, The Magnificent Seven, right? And
Yes.
that was started based off of a previous movie, which was a Japanese movie called The Seven Samurai.
Yes.
And that was the baseline for a lot of other movies that sprouted off of that. And
Yeah.
so I recalled, back earlier in this podcast history, going and watching The Seven Samurai with high anticipation and going, this was kind of crap, not gonna lie.
That's how it
Why
goes.
was this the inspiration for all of these other movies? Which are, The Magnificent
That movie
Seven, I think,
walked
is a
so
movie.
others could fly. That's how I would put it. It's like the first Alien movie. Have you ever seen the first Alien movie?
I have not. No.
So I'm not going to spoil any of it, but what I am going to tell
Appreciate
you is, like, when you watch, if you've seen any of the newer ones and then you watch the first one, it's going to be lackluster because the jig is up. You know what's kind of going on, but what you don't get is how that first watch through, when you watched it when it first came out, the importance of the standards that it had established
was phenomenal.
And it could only go up from there if it was done right. And it was.
Right.
Mostly. Until Alien 3.
Well, I think my point that I was driving for in this case was, this movie, I think, is legitimately a solid movie. Yeah. So that, you can, like, I kind of look back at Seven Samurai and I say, okay, it's weird that this is the movie that started all these other movies, because I don't consider it that great, right? Even though it's considered a classic. But I could look back at this movie and say, it's not my favorite movie. Granted, I'm not a huge horror person. I'm not a huge monster person. But I can also see the appeal of it, and I did enjoy my watch through of this, even though it's a 1982 movie, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that there's something to be said for, not only is it the first of its kind in some ways, not exactly the first of its kind, but in some ways it is, but also it is in and of itself a solid story.
It has a lot of stuff that continues to go for it. Like, the fact is, there's continued discussion to this day about this movie.
Yeah.
And it just keeps going. It's a cult classic. It keeps going because not everything's been answered. There's more and more questions. There's more and more answers, but there's never a full answer to anything. Even if they come out with another movie, please don't just do a remake of the 2011 one and give it its practical effects back, please.
Nice.
It's so topical. It's such a topical movie. And it will continue to be for a very long time, because as long as we can break it down, we'll realize littler and littler details. Like, I brought up, I went and I saw the 40th anniversary of it in theaters.
Yeah. So
one of the things that I saw was that there was a point during when they went to go talk to Blair, and when him and Knowles split off to go and look at his cabin because the light was on. When they're leaving there, the 40th anniversary version in theaters had widescreen, something that hadn't been done before to the movie. Okay. And in one of the corners, you could see that the light was off when they were heading out there. And while they were out there, while they were talking to Blair, someone else got into the cabin.
You mean in Blair's cabin?
No, into MacReady's cabin. Because they went up, he goes, well, we're going to go look at my shack. Why? Because when I left yesterday, I left the lights off. And they look and the lights are on. They weren't on when they went out into the snow to go to Blair's cabin right before they had that conversation.
So someone went.
So somebody went while they were while they were talking to Blair. Someone went in, probably around like the back or some way, and went up there, stashed the stuff up there, and then left the light on and went back into the main building. Huh. And that's why this movie is so good, is because even tiny little revelations like that change things entirely.
Especially in regards to the timeline for this one.
The timeline and just kind of like the mapping of where everyone's supposed to be at.
Yeah.
It's a little puzzle to solve, and I love that.
Yeah. You love your puzzles, your foreshadowing, your villains, your monsters. You love so many things.
Oh yeah, it's so good. There's so much to love.
So did you love how this movie left you? Did it leave you satisfied? Are you like, oh yeah, let's bring the Thing movie out? Or are you like, let it lie, I don't want to see another one? Where were you in that?
When I first watched it, I wanted to see a sequel. I didn't know what I wanted.
Yes.
I didn't know what I
Nice.
wanted technically from a sequel, and then we got the prequel. And I
Nice.
was very hyped for the prequel because I
Ah,
love the first one. So technically, yes, my love for it still hangs in that way. I loved
yes.
it. I'd love to see the prequel done right. Maybe a sequel done right, please.
Right.
But also, I think if anyone tried to make anything like that, so I'd still be excited for it. But films nowadays have kind of killed my expectations for it.
Dang
Which,
Hollywood, man.
oh yeah,
I was satisfied. I don't know that I'm like super hyped to watch the next one, but I was like, yeah, this is definitely, I enjoyed watching this movie. It was a solid Alien movie. I
hmm
honestly thought that in some ways, so I guess it's worth noting that I
yeah,
have watched other Alien movies, zombie movies, those kinds of
yeah,
things, and I just took them as so absurd that I started laughing.
yeah.
Like one of my friends was trying to get me scared, so he had me watch Signs with him, right? And then when the aliens showed up, I busted up laughing.
Water.
Okay,
Yeah, of
yeah,
course.
and then the next day he had me watch World War Z, and then the zombies started jumping off the side of a skyscraper, and I busted up laughing again. He takes the
Yeah.
remote, turns off the TV, and says, "Maverick, we're done until you can be serious." So normally, I've not
Yeah,
had these like solid experiences with these movies, but
yeah,
this
of
one I was
course.
like, okay, this is good.
Yeah,
I enjoyed this. So
that's
I
good.
say it
That's
gives
good.
me a thumbs up in
Good.
this case.
Perfect.
Would you change your rating after our conversation?
Only based on the rubric, I'd put it more at mine is closer to like a 9.5 because of like the intricacy of the filmmaking too and
Okay.
everything. Because that's another thing I like to take into account of it all.
Uh-huh.
But I'd definitely put it out of 9. 8.05 is what my score came out on there.
hmm
Anywhere between that and an 8.5.
Nice.
Because
Yeah,
I
I
mean,
mean,
it's still not a
yeah,
perfect movie. Like I
of
can
course
tell
not.
it's a rag doll when Windows is getting his head chopped.
Of
You
course,
could
of
tell
course.
you could tell it's a
Yeah,
rag doll spewing blood. It's like
sure,
it's still
sure.
gross. So I'm still here for it, but
That's why I'm here. Okay, yeah. Well,
what about you?
that definitely doesn't. I don't know. The ragdolling makes me like the movie more, but I definitely did see some of the points you were saying, especially I think
Yeah,
about the themes. Some of the things at the beginning gave it, 0.1 here or there.
yeah,
So
for sure.
I probably bump it up by about half a point, so it's at a solid 7. And yeah, that definitely puts it in the halls of a movie I would watch again and be
Yeah,
perfectly satisfied with watching.
yeah, dude. I gotta watch a horror movie with you so you can see what that's like.
It's an experience just to have you
It
there.
sure is. It sure is. Especially if it's one we both haven't seen.
Uh-huh. Oh
I'd
yeah,
probably
let's
lean
do
over
it.
and be like, "Jump scare's about to happen," and then
Okay.
it happens. I don't
That
need the
would be
knowledge of
it
the
would be
movie. I've
exciting.
done that a lot.
Let's do it. Yeah, I'd
Yeah,
be down.
let's put something together.
Well, that is it, ladies and gentlemen. The Thing. We hope you all enjoyed. I'm sure I did. I'm sure Patrick
Yeah.
has many
Oh
times.
yeah. Oh,
And
many times.
and I hope you guys enjoy seeing us next week, because that's right, we are back with another podcast. See you all next time.